Okay, now that it's 10 o'clock Apple time, we can get underway, and whoever would like to come join us. I would make a public announcement that tomorrow we're canceling our work session. I would imagine most of you were not going to make it anyway. Well, in that case, we'll reinstate it. Okay, welcome, Commissioner.
Good morning. For the record, Frank Gadelblue, Commissioner of Education.
Tammy Valancourt, CFO.
Caitlin Davis, Director.
And so I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions about the reading material I handed out last time.
We've been having a lot of reading material lately.
Okay. Yeah. So good morning. I mean, I'm here to kind of answer questions that you may have relative to the budget, and I can walk through specific programs. I have this sheet right here, which we were provided by Mickey, or I
Right.
have my HB2 language as well. Like, what is the easiest way for me
Why
to
don't we-
facilitate walking through this with?
Why don't we walk through using this?
That document?
as a guide?
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So then we'll start. It is going down. So it says page 28 in the left-hand column, the first 28 there, section 62, Department of Education, Computer Science, and STEM Administrator. Then the next line, 28, 63, Department of Education, Computer Science Educator Program. And then pages 29 and 30, sections 64 and 65, Department of Education, Computer Science Appropriations. And so those, I'm going to talk about those three because they have some interconnectivity in terms of coming together. And really the first item on there, the Computer Science STEM Administrator, is my understanding an administrator position in HB2. That was added in the governor's budget to help us administer the two subsequent programs. So we can talk to that. The only difficulty with that is we don't see an appropriation for that. So while there's a computer science STEM administrator position that was included to administer the programs that are being implemented, there was not funding associated with that. So if we decide to go forward with that programming, it probably would need some administration to take place. But then the next item that I will point out is Computer Science Educator Program. And this is a program to encourage current educators, so this would be individuals who currently hold a teacher certificate in the state of New Hampshire, to add a certificate or an endorsement to their certificate in the computer science area. And so the goal there is to increase the number of computer science educators that we have in the state, to make that more ubiquitous in our school systems. We do run a number of computer science classes. We've got a lot of robotics programming in the state. And so this is a program that would, allow those educators to convert over. And essentially what we would probably do is target 1,000 educators, and we would provide stipends of $500 each for those educators to attain that certification.
Okay, Mary?
Actually, I like that idea. This area for many educators is still a mystery. And we saw that when we had COVID and the difficulty with Zoom. Many of them had to do a lot. How do you see this happening? Will their training be covered and stipended, I believe you said?
Correct.
So what do you think it'll look like? Because currently, quite frankly, the current programs usually in most schools are pretty dry, and they're not in context. They're not part of an application. But in truth, I've been away from schools for a while, so I may be all off. But in my experience, they haven't been very exciting, and the exciting stuff is going on. So tell me about that.
I can tell you about that. So first of all, I'd like to just kind of pull apart the kind of what you were describing there relative to what this is. So this is not for program so much as it is getting the certifications for the educators. The other thing I will mention is with our ARP-ESSER funds, and so this is specifically targeted at computer science educators. We did provide $2 million of funding and worked with Granite State College for all of our educators to be able to take a class that would help them with the remote instruction. So it taught them, how to use Canvas, how to design an online class, and how to implement an online class. So that I'm going to separate that. This is specifically associated with allowing currently certified educators to add a computer certification so that there are more opportunities for students across the state vis-a-vis those instructors. And the way that that would be administered is through a stipend that we would offer to the educators who are interested in pursuing that career opportunity. So,
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for taking the questions. So I'm just trying to understand that this 500 would be the stipend for the educator themselves. This is not the reimbursement for their training or travel or testing expenses. Is it just the compensation for taking on the work, and then those other expenses will be handled by the district or by whom?
no, actually the inverse of that. So what this would be the $500 of the cost for the educators to attend the courses or the programs to be able to acquire the knowledge and the capability
So this
to
is
be
the
able to
reimbursement for
attain
the
the
expense.
certification. Right.
Okay.
This is to allow them to become certified,
Thank you.
not for programming. So. And then just I'm moving forward, just to keep moving forward, but we can come back to it, but they all kind of come together. So that's what I'm going to keep going forward. Then you'll see there's in addition, the $4 million appropriation. It's actually a $5 million in total, but is associated with expanding the availability of computer science teachers in the system by going outside of the traditional certified educators. If you recall, the first program was about taking individuals who already hold an educator certification and allowing them to add the certificate for the endorsement for computer science educator. This is really to bring individuals off of the sidelines. We imagine that there may be some retired individuals in the state who have a lot of experience, whether it's in math or computer science, and allowing them to gain certification. That would take, there's two ways that would happen. And actually you have to kind of follow through both of those. But one would be, we would identify current computer certifications, industry recognized credentials that individuals hold, whether it's like a Cisco license or a programming license from a vendor, right? So these are individuals who are credentialed in the commercial world. And we would recognize those credentials, which would allow them to become a certified teacher. And then this funding stream would allow them to add the pedagogical capability to that certification so that they would be able to function as a certified teacher in New Hampshire.
Microsoft could be.
Microsoft would be one that we would probably have. I don't know if we might not, credential someone who holds like an Office certification, like Word or something like that, but more of the serious certifications, yes.
Question?
Thank you. So this is essentially the part where you are going and finding for the lack of the better word, geeks, and training them to be teachers.
That's correct.
Well, I will just say,
That term is an affectionate term of affection.
I am,
Yes,
it
okay.
is a self-inflicted term. I was a certified computer
Self-inflicted. There
trainer
you go.
for a
Okay.
while. I only get to say it because I'm one of them. But my concern there, and I just want to, state it for the record, is that most of the time it is easier to take somebody who's already a teacher and teach them the computer skills they need than it is to take a computer expert and show them how to become a teacher. Those skills are harder to acquire, and you have a much lower percentage of people that can make the transition than the other way around. So just to share, because I've been in that field for over 10 years professionally, and one of the reasons why I was making the big bucks was that I was one of the people who was both very technically capable and could teach. But it's the second part that's harder to find. So you may find more success taking the existing teachers and making them more proficient in computers than the other way around. But those are very much worth exploring. And when they work spectacularly well. Thank you.
And so you can kind of see how these two programs are complementary in that sense. One is taking the existing educators and giving them the computer science skills, and the other is pulling people off of the sideline and making them teachers. So.
Question?
Yeah, I don't know if I misunderstood. The people that you'd be bringing in, the computer science professionals, did you say that they were certified already coming into the program?
Correct. So what would happen
Certified,
is
but not just that they were certified in whatever they were doing. It's just, it strikes me that the people I know who are retired in computer science have never have had a credential, and these are the superstars in the field who are in the state.
meaning that they
Meaning
hold,
they're Silicon Valley, well, geeks or whatever, or high performers.
right. So, I mean, and so I'm trying to understand the question a little bit because it might be helpful for me as we kind of craft the program, but is the issue that those individuals don't hold an industry credential?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. How many different certifications do you have now in specialties? You know, like is it K-8, high school? I mean,
Yeah, probably more than 50.
really
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
Question?
And I can get the exact number for you, but I don't know off the top of my head.
You know, we're already doing this.
So these individuals, those industry recognized certifications would allow them to attain the computer science certification, not, we wouldn't create a new certification for you're an educator of Cisco, you're an educator of Oracle or something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to quickly follow up on Representative Murray's comment, it is a very valid point. There are people who get lots of certifications, and there are people who have already established themselves and don't need the certifications because their work experience and achievements prove it. So I would urge the department to be flexible when they try to attract technical professionals and allow for both avenues, because proven capability and performance is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than a technical certification. So, you know, just like not asking people to have a college degree, but just show they can do the job. If you guys can be flexible on deciding who can do the job, every one of those methods work, and I think you should open all of them.
Okay.
You know,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I mean, in one way we might be able to pursue that is really working with perhaps Granite State College that has a program where they recognize experience and they're able to award certifications based on that experience.
Yep.
So we don't have to build that infrastructure. We would leverage that infrastructure.
Sure.
Other questions? Are you ready to move on these items? Let's start with.
Keep going. Oh, you're making the motion? Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
How do you plan to measure the outcome of this program?
So it would be the number of certified computer science educators that we have in our schools.
I was thinking one level down the road, how do you measure that it makes an impact in, the outcomes for our children? I mean, obviously in the short term, you'd, be able to see the number of people you are able to bring in, but down the road, how do we prove to, the people we're asking for the money from that this money was well spent and improved the outcomes for our kids?
So we don't have a computer science assessment, so we don't have a mechanism that would be able to measure that. And I think what you'd find is that the computer science, particularly as you look forward in terms of the instructional, it's going to be much more integrated in terms of, in other words, like it's not going to be siloed, like, okay, here's computer science class and how many students are participating in it. That really needs to be integrated into, the science curriculum and in all kinds of curriculum, quite frankly. So I don't know that we have a mechanism for measuring that.
It would be good if you'd, over time consider developing some framework. I know it's not for today, you are still a few steps away from there, but I would argue that at the end of the day, these types of large investments do require us to look down the road and say 10 years from now, yeah, this worked or it didn't,
it
and
paying
this
off
is
or
how
not?
we can show, right? So,
So the initial metrics that we've considered is the number of computer science educators.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Is this short term
Correct. This is a one-time thing.
and source of funds?
From
The
you all.
trust, I'm presuming, the
General
trust?
funds, yeah.
General funds. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I think this might be 23 laps, actually, yeah. General funds laps, right?
Before moving on to on these sections, two things that I'm just noticing. The commissioner talked about there's no funding associated to this new administrator position that was established. So we haven't received any estimates or requests relative to that. Do you have a number?
No, but we can get that for you.
So that position is established in House Bill 2, Section 62, but there's no funding for it.
Right, so.
Right now.
We would have an amendment that would establish the funding as a separate section?
Or put it in House Bill 1 or put it in as an appropriation here. There's two ways to do it, but we would need those numbers if you wanted to fund that position as a committee. So just putting that,
Can we move on the item and then Okay,
Wanted to make sure the committee was aware that that would have to happen.
And we'll get that information for
so
you.
we're looking at something around 150 grand,
Probably, yes.
give or take.
Question, could we just take it out of the 4.955?
You can.
And that way we give you authority to do that, so it's coming out, it's already in there?
If you wanted to repurpose some of the appropriation, because there's 3 different appropriations here. So you'd have to pick kind of where you'd want that to come from. Reduce one of those to add it to fund the position.
Do you have a preference, Mr. Commissioner?
It should probably come out of 6465, I think is the larger one.
What do you want us to do? Just do $150,000 as part of the,
Or we can fund, just allow us to fund a position, a STEM educator, administrator out of that
Out of those funds.
section, correct.
do we have to say that
That's actually a good
specifically?
idea, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we would. And so I can add that from this appropriation, may also fund the STEM administrator and RSA 21 and 13 that's established there. The other thing I think we just would want a little bit of information on is on page 30 of House Bill 2, line 8, where it talks about the department retaining up to 3% of these funds for administering the program. And that's somewhat unusual to see cost allocation of general funds to support general fund administration. So I don't know if the department want to speak to that, because we will see that later in the education trust fund section as well. Page 30, line 8.
It would give us enough. That's what I was just gonna do the math. I think that would do it. Yeah, that's 150, so we'll do that.
But it does
we're all
say
set.
it does say not more than $50,000. So
But not more than 50,000 won't be adequate, right?
right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
well,
If I may.
so where are we?
If I may.
Yeah,
If we just change the no more than 50,000 to no more than 150,000, that would pretty much cover an administrator
Or just,
position.
or strike the 50,000 and then leave it at
Well,
up to 3%.
I would prefer to keep the cap just because at the end of the day, this program may grow more, and I don't want to end up with a expansive line item there. But up to 150 should more than cover it and can be adjusted further in other HB2s. And that's the end of
so
my
you're
comment
talking
here.
about, you're talking about amending line 8.
Correct. On page
page
30,
30.
line 7, 8, just putting a 1 in front of the 50, and then we do not need to fund the admin anymore. That's the funds for the admin.
So just so we're clear, so the 3% is about 150,000 of the appropriation anyways, yeah.
So
It's the same
we-
amount, same way to get there.
Yep,
We'll strike the 3%. It's really not customary that we put percentages attached to funds like this in the budget. So I feel better if we strike the 3% and take what.
make it 150.
And it should be an up to though.
Specify up to 150.
Yeah, because I don't want to, in others, like if I don't need it, I shouldn't spend it, right?
So
So before we do that, can I point out that these funds say that they shall not lapse? The $150,000 would only be for 1 year. That would be the cost for 1 year. If this program went 2 years, that would be $300,000 for 2 years to support this program. So $150,000 would only be 1 year of salary and
so it
benefits.
should say $150,000 per year.
The cleaner way to do this would be to appropriate money for the position, appropriate money for each of the 3 components of this program.
Right.
And this is where I'm getting back to the retaining money from a general fund appropriation to, I'm not sure what that, if that is for the position, that 50,000 was for the position, then I feel like you could take that out and just fund the position directly.
Take out that whole section.
Take out that Roman 4 on page 30, line 8, and just directly fund the position.
Okay,
Would be a cleaner way to do it.
all right.
And then the only question would be if you wanted to keep this net zero, so you're going to add, let's say it's $150,000 a year for the position, which appropriation would you want to reduce to do that? So you've got,
The 4.9,
Yeah, the larger one. Right.
so the 4.9 is 500,000 for one thing, 4 million for another thing, and 455 for a third thing. So if you go to page 29 of House Bill 2, section 64, you'll see that breakout. So we just want to make it clear if the true intent here is to keep this a net zero to fund the position and still fund those 3 appropriations, I think you'd have to have an offset.
I would take it out of Roman numeral 2. The $4 million. That's the biggest basket of eggs. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll work with the department to get the exact, so we fund that position at the proper labor grade and step that they think it would need to be, because it might not be 150 exact, but whatever it would be.
140, could be 160.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've moved, are you
Well-
moving all these items or just? Want to do them one at a time?
Well, I think Mickey has it, and we can do them as a group, because he can do paperwork to reflect,
So,
what he wants.
so then we're talking about section 62, 63, 64, and 65 with an amendment to follow for, in-
Funding
funding the
the position,
position.
we would reduce Roman 2, so the 4 million for the purposes of encouraging individuals holding it eligible, so that Roman 2 on page 29 would be reduced by the cost to fund the position, and then would come out, yeah, correct.
Everybody in favor of that? Raise your hand.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
okay.
was just gonna speak to it because I had experience in high school. Yeah, I had experience in high school where we didn't get electronics training. So when you take the test for the Air Force, you score poorly. So, and then later on, I did all right.
Okay. So that takes us to which section next?
Section 34, page 34, section 9192 is the Teacher of the Year program. And I do know that Deputy Commissioner Christine Brennan wishes she was here to talk to this because this is one of her favorite programs. And I will tell you that this year we had more educators apply and be recommended as Teacher of the Year than we've ever had in the past. So very good. This would actually change the nature of the program such that this would become a funded position. So essentially the state would be paying the Teacher of the Year for a year to just be focused on Teacher of the Year activities. So the way that it works now is the Teacher of the Year is nominated. They're in the school district. They still have teaching responsibilities, but we balance those responsibilities with their extracurricular things that they do for Teacher of the Year. This would allow them to be full-time Teacher of the Year, as well as provide a stipend to the school to be able to pay for someone else to cover for that person.
Question?
Thank you. For years, we had the Kristen McCullough Award, and I believe over years that did a similar thing. Does that still exist?
It does not.
It does
I mean,
not.
so generally the way that I fund this now is I go out to industry partners and I ask for donations.
And we
we've
have-
been successful getting close to that. So
As former deputy, I too had to do
that.
Teacher of the Year, so
Yeah.
I'm very familiar. Anything that we can do to promote the value of our public school teachers, I think is of high value. And actually, it would be great if we could do something like this. I really like the thought of it. And I would definitely support this because I think it's such a good image to promote for our teachers across the state. And we certainly will have a lot more interest in this program because now
well, we've got interest. We have
I
over
understand. I
300
know.
applications.
I understand that, which is a great thing.
Yes.
I'm pleased. So
Just to be clear, like when I first started in this role, like 6 years ago, we had, 10 or
I
15
know.
people applying every year. It was like nobody was doing anything. But
I
we've
know.
we've been out, we've been talking to educators,
Right.
encouraging them to apply, encouraging people to recommend individuals, and we've gone from a handful to hundreds.
are these non-lapsing funds?
They lapse at the end of 25, so this is for 2 years, for 24 and 25.
Could we make them non-lapsing? It just, then you have money.
I don't even know if that's necessary.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Right,
Go ahead, Joe.
right, thank you. Would you still be going out to your industry partners?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Would you still be going out to your industry partners to get more funding to?
I would, only because I want to make sure that they continue to have skin in the game of the success of our education system, which is one of the advantages I see to going out and working with our partners.
Thank you.
Yeah?
So to make sure I understand this correctly, this is 250 over 2 years, so it would be 125 a year. You said it will be used both to basically compensate the teacher that we pull out of the school to just be the teacher of the year for a year, and there would be a stipend for the school district. I have
Only if we're not going to pay people twice, right? So they don't have to pay that teacher. Therefore, we're
right.
not
So I
gonna
was
pay-
wondering why the stipend for the school district.
Yeah, nobody gets to double up. I don't know what the differential will be in terms of, if they have to bring into a long-term sub and if there's an additional
Okay, so
incremental cost.
the intent of that is to just make sure that the school district does not lose money because
not
we pull their
penalized,
teacher,
exactly.
right?
Correct.
And then what would be the duties of the teacher of the year as a full-time teacher of the year? I would appreciate just a bit of, obviously I understand the, recognition part, but what would they do over the year?
So I don't think that has been fully fleshed out in terms of where they would, the specific duties that they would do, but we imagine that they would be doing lots of training, programming for educators in terms of, these are the teacher of the years, these are the most highly recognized educators. And so how is it that they have been successful in their classrooms, engaging students, engaging their community? They would be speaking to parents and parent groups in terms of how to help their children be successful in that educational environment. But the program has not been fully developed.
Thank you.
Question?
I just want to make sure this is public school teachers, public charter, and public schools.
This is for our Teacher of the Year program, which is a public school
Thank you.
program.
Other questions?
Oh, wait, actually, can I clarify that? Yeah, because no, we actually have Teachers of the Year who are from our non-public schools as well, because we've had Bishop Brady in like a couple years ago. Yeah, they have to hold a New Hampshire certificate.
Other questions? Move the item? Okay. We have a second to move the item? Yeah, all those in favor? Okay. Moving on.
Okay, page 57, line
Sorry,
item.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, can we go back to the Civics Commission and
Oh,
the
did I miss that?
appropriation, yeah, the 2 million for the,
What line item is that one?
so we're on pages, it starts on page 32, sections 86 through 88.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't have that one highlighted, so I skipped over that. Yes, happy to do that. So this basically creates the Commission on New Hampshire Civics, which includes a broad spectrum of participants in terms of who participates on that, including 3 public members appointed by the governor, the chair of New Hampshire Civics or their designee, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Secretary of State, the Chief Administrative Judge of the Superior Court, the Chief Administrative Judge for the Circuit Court, Commissioner of Education, 2 New Hampshire Civics educators appointed by the Commissioner, and 2 members of the House of Representatives appointed by the Speaker of the House, 1 member of the Senate appointed by the Senate President, and 1 member of the Governor's Office appointed by the Governor. And essentially, the Commission is tasked with the goal of coming up with and creating a textbook and related curriculum. And you'll notice that that's something that the department and the state is traditionally not involved in curriculum development. Curriculum specifically designed for New Hampshire students and teachers to help them explore history, heritage, and principles of New Hampshire Constitution and the government it established. We are required. I'm not sure if we don't have any estimates in terms of the funding, but we're required to provide a paper copy of the published textbook available to each New Hampshire civics classroom, as well as an interactive website. Some of you may have seen the civics program that we have in 4th grade that was developed by New Hampshire Civics, which is a great civics program for our 4th grade students about New Hampshire government and New Hampshire history. So I imagine it would follow along the same type of, modality. And essentially that's what this appropriation is for.
Question?
Isn't there a commission already or some group of people working on this? Betty Camposi was asking me about this, and I assumed it was sort of the same thing. So
So-
can you tie those, make the connection for me there?
We can, and they are through one of the appointees to the from the organization New Hampshire Civics, which is working on that effort. So in other words, so this is really now merging those efforts so that their efforts right now have been happening over here, that they merge with the rest of us in terms of we're all working in the same direction.
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just concerned about the ability of this to easily become political. what are the guarantees that it will be apolitical in nature and it will be unbiased? Just right now, we are existing in a highly political arena, and civics essentially should not be like that. I mean, there are facts and how to do things, and I wouldn't have a problem with it, but I fear that depending upon the members of the commission, how it would be put together. That's my concern. How assure me that this won't happen?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can assure you. I mean, the governor is going to appoint individuals. I don't know who he's going to appoint. You do have a number of people who are apolitical, particularly, the chair of New Hampshire Civics, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Secretary of State, the Chief Administrative Judge. So there are a number of appointees to this that are apolitical positions. And so I would hope that it doesn't go there, Representative Heath, but I don't know that I even have the ability to tell you that it can't get there.
When I worked at the department, one of the things that I had worked very hard to try and promote was a civics curriculum that was performance-based and had activities like kindergartners would do some kind of a hands-on project. First graders would do something, and second graders, and then the fourth grade, that's kind of the full-blown, talking with
New
people.
Hampshire history, yeah.
But they would be actively engaged in the learning, and there'd be some kind of a rubric that would look at it, and so the kids really had an understanding because they really were part of it. They'd get their parents to go vote. They'd see how the process worked. Do you anticipate anything like that maybe being in this book?
So I don't know about that because as I read this statute, I don't know that it's a book and we have a K-12
Yeah, I
system,
know.
right? So we're probably referring to kind of a middle or high school type of thing. What I can say is, and I think, I've demonstrated this and we've kind of talked about it, is the need for engaging pedagogy, we're not trying to put
Yes.
kids to sleep these days.
Yes, exactly. All right.
So if I have any say over it, I can tell you that we will drive towards, engagement in terms of the pedagogy.
And something that's performance-based maybe with activities built in.
So when you say performance-based, like a competency-based, like do you learn the things or didn't you learn it? Is that what you mean?
Well, with a rubric that shows examples of different levels to which kids achieve to.
Yep. So that would be competency-based. So what is it that you have demonstrated your ability to do?
Right.
So
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I have some concerns too. I just want to express, we're living in a climate where we are limiting what we are able to teach in English. The legislatures are limiting to teachers what they can teach, in particular with history and particularly with English. When something like the Diary of Anne Frank was a required reading when I was a kid, and now it's banned in some states. This is bizarre. And I worry that this becomes a vehicle for going down that path, that this become a way to put in restrictions of what teachers should be free to teach.
Thank you. I can assure you that, speaking for myself, I don't plan to ban any books whatsoever. Allowing parents to control what kids may want to see, that's a totally different story, but not banning books. Just to echo, though, to follow up on Representative Heath's point, what I took her to say and what I would say for myself is that I want to see that kids, as a result of whatever resources we give them, have the ability to apply those, not just repeat back whatever the books say. And I think that's, in a nutshell, whatever language you want to use about it, what I'm interested in seeing. Competencies that, can be tested and proven that, that information can be used rather than just repeated back. That's where I'm coming from when I'm looking at any outcome of an education program.
So when I hear you, I mean, I think that's both of you are just talking about good pedagogy, right?
Right.
In terms of making sure the students learn stuff.
Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering about the funds, if these are lapsing or non-lapsing funds for this particular item.
Was it?
Non-lapsing.
Which is probably appropriate given the amount of time that something like that would take to make happen.
Follow up?
Just in another line of thought. So, I am a little bit concerned about creating a print textbook in the age of modernization that we live in, and I'm wondering if the department has considered an ebook instead.
So I share that concern. And in particular, if you imagine it says a paper copy of the published textbook, like that's, does that mean one textbook per page? So I see this as really curricular materials that are available to the actual classes where that would take place. Yeah, it would be in Canvas probably, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Did I hear that parents are going to be part of this commission?
There are no parents currently listed as
Isn't-
members of the commission.
To follow up, parents should have some say in the curriculum.
I think that'd be wonderful.
I
Yeah,
mean,
we have
you know,
no,
I
pro-
mean,
we have no objection to that. Yeah,
Maybe they should be added.
I think that would be a good addition.
Okay, big guy, you're the one that's, what is it gonna say? Add a parent? I mean,
A couple parents. I mean, how many?
Right, because we have 3 public members appointed by the governor, but you could also just say 3
Oh,
parent
okay.
members.
Well,
But you could specify, have 3 parents of, New Hampshire school students.
say again?
Maybe one of which is also a parent of a student currently enrolled in a public educated by a public educated or certification.
Or in a New Hampshire
holder. Yeah.
in a New Hampshire qualified education program.
Yeah. I mean, so that one of 3 at least is a parent who will have a voice.
So there'll be 2 at large and then 1 defined as parent of,
Of a student in a qualified New Hampshire education program.
okay, I'm just saying it again because I see Mickey writing over there.
Would we be comfortable with 2 parents and 1 at large? I'm just asking because again,
I have no problem with that.
I don't want it to be all parents because there are people who no longer have kids of school age and yet have every right to be represented. I'm just trying to find a balance, I come to think of it, I'm actually fine with just 1 parent because there is nothing to prevent the governor from adding more parents if they feel like it, but this gives them the more flexibility. And we made the point that we want at least 1 parent. So I'll stick with that and withdraw my suggestions.
Do you have that, Nick?
So yes, on page 32 of House Bill 2, line 37, where it's 3 public members appointed by the governor, we would add something to the tune of one of which shall be a parent of a student in a qualified New Hampshire education program.
Okay, good.
I would, just add, I guess for argument's sake there, most likely 1 out of the 3 would be a parent anyway. I don't really know if we need to get that specific about it. Chances are one of those people will have kids. And I would just as soon leave it open to the governor to find 3 qualified people as of people who just happen to have a biological child or whatever. So I'm fine with the way that it is. I don't like when we get too specific about telling other people what to do. So.
But it's the curriculum. It's the kids. Well, they're not, but.
You gotta turn your mic on, Joe, if you're gonna talk.
Yeah, it's their choice. I mean, we have in our history, go with civics. The U.S. Supreme Court, time and time and again, has sided with the parents to control the education and the upbringing of their children, and this is part of it.
Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opposed to this. I just think in our current climate, historically, we have not, as legislators, dictated curriculum. Usually it's something we've left up to local control. We've set up standards and guidelines at the Department of Ed, but nothing this structured. So I will be voting against this. Thank you very much.
Okay. Other comments? So we're gonna leave the parents in, or we're not gonna leave the parents in? It's a vote. Yeah.
I would move to include the 1 parent language as suggested. Just because, again, while I completely understand that you can have 3 people who are not parents and be very qualified to talk about civics and whatnot, I think that having direct access to, the experiences of 1 or more children in the current schools would be helpful in terms of informing the commission of what the, situations are that may arise on a daily basis, and having 1 voice to represent that out of God knows how many members. I'm not even gonna go back count. I think is a very reasonable adjustment. And we are prescribing the membership of this. So clarifying that prescription is fully within the bounds of the committee and HB2.
Okay, so all those in favor of adding the language about one parent of school age student, whatever the words are. Raise your hand on just that one. Okay, 4 to 5. Yeah, 5 to 2. I gotta get my hand up. All right, now on the item,
Before we go to the next item, just a clarification question on an earlier item.
yeah,
We moved funds on the Department of Education Computer Science appropriations. We took funds to fund the administrator position. I want to make sure I understand whether we moved 150 or 300, whether we moved the 150 per year or we did it for 2 years and we are taking 300 of that, just to clarify that.
My understanding was that it was 150 per year.
150 per year. So we moved a net of 300 out of the 4 million.
Right.
Just making sure we're all on the same page. I wasn't sure if that was explicitly discussed. Thank you.
okay, now back to item 86 through
88.
88. By show of hands, who of this item? All those in favor? All opposed? Okay, it'll go forward 4 to 3.
And just so the committee knows, I'm going to make a technical correction on section 87. You'll notice there's no what we refer to as warrant language on there, the statement that says the governor may draw a warrant against funds not
Right.
otherwise appropriate. I think that was probably just missed in drafting. So for that appropriation section, you'll see some different language there just to make
That's
that
fine.
technical correction.
Fine. Okay. Moving right along.
Okay, so item 163 is the definition of an eligible student for education freedom account. And I don't know that there's a specific appropriation associated with that. And I don't know, and again, I know you are taking this particular issue up in a lot of different contexts, so I want to now go over something that's already being going over somewhere else. But if there's the appropriate forum, I'm happy to have a conversation about it. And in particular, what I'm referring to is there is House Bill 464, which ultimately will be before the Senate. So do we want to have that conversation now, or do you?
I'm sorry, which item is it?
So it's okay. It's item 163.
163. Okay, I was on the wrong page. All right.
Page 57.
Yep. Please.
Okay. So this is dealing with the eligibility of the Education Freedom Account students. And one of the items that I saw in that HB2 language that I know is being considered by the various individuals is whose annual household income in section 6A, whose annual household income at the time the student applies for the program is less than or equal to 300%. I know there's been conversation about changing that number. And I would support a change to that number if it was an increase in that number. But then otherwise, really the substance of what we had proposed was one whereby we expanded categories of eligibility for students to participate in these EFAs, particularly focusing on students that are otherwise have some type of a disadvantage in terms of accessing their education. Some of those individuals would probably qualify at the 300 or 350 or 500% levels anyways. But by enumerating them in there, then they are not subject to that income limitation test. You can see the types of students that we're talking about are foster care students, migratory students, student who is homeless in the state of New Hampshire, a student who is whose parents are members of the armed forces, who are, quite frankly, are students who find themselves sometimes, moving around quite a bit, and their education tends to get disrupted. So this may create some degree of stability for them. Our English language learner students, who are throughout our system, students who are persistently bullied. And again, that's as it's defined. It's not a capricious definition in terms of what's persistently bullied. It's the definition of RSA 193-F:3. A student with a disability, A student who has a manifest education hardship would be eligible to participate, irrespective of their income limits. And then a student who lives in the geographical boundaries of a district as identified as a CSI school, which is our lowest performing schools, would be eligible. So if you're in a non-performing school, you'd be eligible. And then a student who is in a school that's defined as a persistently dangerous school. And again, that's a statutory definition for what a persistently dangerous school is, generally dealing with felony events occurring in the school environment. And then finally, a student who is a free and reduced price meal student. And again, as an example, those are students who may otherwise qualify anyways.
I believe that we did pass that bill.
Okay.
And
So I didn't know if we needed to have more conversation here or not, so.
So yes, House Bill 367 changed on page 57, line 17, that subparagraph A, the threshold for income to be 350%. That's one difference from what we have in front of us in House Bill 2. And then also in House Bill 464, that next subparagraph B, I don't believe exists. The 500%
this did not exist.
did not exist in 465. So those are the two variances that jumped out at me between what passed the House last week versus what you had before you in House Bill 2.
I'm of the opinion that we modified this to match what we passed in the House. Any
And
thoughts?
that amendment is in drafting. I don't have it to
Okay.
pass out today. It's in OLS now being drafted. So it can be done today if you choose to, or wait until I have the hard copy. But that's what is in drafting.
Okay.
Just a technical question. Since it's a bill that was passed, why do we need an OLS amendment? Is the language different in HB2?
Correct.
It is different House Bill 2.
Okay.
So that,
I'm new.
yeah, no, so there's always different approaches here. One is to not have it part of House Bill 2 and have it pass in another. Another is to have it in both bills, but usually you would want a uniform so you don't pass two separate
Right.
positions on the same statute.
So can I just ask Mickey a clarifying question? So under subparagraph 6B, when you say that that language was excluded from 464, I think is what you just said. But it wasn't all of B because B includes all of the subcategories that we've just reviewed.
I'm sorry, specific to just be as far
The
as the
500%.
500%
Fine.
threshold.
So just clarifying that.
All the
other
remaining
subcategories remain.
subcategories are there just without
Okay.
an income
Got
threshold.
it.
Everybody follow that one? Okay.
Yeah, just two quick questions. One really quick. Do we have any, where'd the language go? Persistently, what is it called? No, do we have any persistently dangerous schools in New Hampshire? And the second thing is, a lot of these students, it seems, would have some relationship with Youth and Family Services or DHHS. So they're in that system, and for good reason. How will these things interface if these kids are pulled out if they're not in the public school?
So they would still be eligible for all of those HHS types of programming. This would just allow either the parent or the guardian or the surrogate parent, like we have surrogate educational parents, that may find that that student in a particular education setting is not being successful and really needs to seek an alternative. I mean, as an example of that, even this weekend I received a call from foster families who the student is in an educational setting, is a foster kid, so is being fostered. So I'm hearing from the foster parents, and is in a situation probably because of the child's foster status is receiving some bullying in school, and got placed into that school because of the foster relationship. And so the parents were seeking whether or not this student would be eligible because through an education freedom account, they would be able to redirect the education to another setting that they thought might be more appropriate.
Does this add to, will DHHS have to do something additional in order to work with the children within these systems, or do you foresee an additional burden to DHHS?
I don't. It would use the same systems, which is
Do we have any, I forget the words, it's such a strange
persistently.
phrase.
Oh, but we do not. We measure that every year. We like to try not to have that. We did have a scare recently that we thought we had some, and then we went back and looked at some police reports and determined that those were not the types of charges that would have resulted in that.
Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, you've expanded the categories quite significantly. My question to you is, can you assure me of the safety of all the children receiving EFAs and the environments within which they are placed? I am highly concerned about, number one, the accountability of the learning environment. Number two, the safety of the children. I've been around for a long time and I have seen some pretty nasty stuff within some families that I was quite shocked that these things would occur in. How and can you assure me that children will be safe?
So thank you for that question, Representative Heath, and I share your concern to make sure that our children across the state are safe. And we are doing all that we can to make sure that children are safe. And as you know, we want to make sure they're safe in, let me just finish for a moment, in any of the educational settings that we have them in. And as you know, when you say, can I assure you, I don't know that I can give you 100% assurance that they're safe in my traditional public schools. And as you know, we have educator misconduct that takes place. Students are exposed, but we put in place programs, we put in place security measures, we put in place various screening measures to try and do all we can to make sure that those children are safe, because none of us wants to see something happen to a child.
Just a follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in my many years of being an administrator and a teacher, I have had to report numerous incidents. If I had not been in the position I was in to report those behaviors, they would have continued. And I have to say, somehow, some way, I hope that within your scholarship organization or your Department of Ed or whatever you're doing, that there's some kind of guidelines put in place, because I told the governor's office the same thing. I'm really worried because we have over 10,000 children being homeschooled. We don't know what the environment is. I mean, we've all read stories with the book Education. We read her book, and that was not in New Hampshire, fortunately. But I mean, I just have to say that so often in the incidences where violations and perpetrations of children have occurred, it's been the educators in our public schools or public charter schools that have identified those behaviors and have reported them. Who will report to DCYF? How will we know?
Yeah, and as you know, in New Hampshire, we're all, mandatory reporters, right? So wherever that context is, whether it is a child who is being abused in public school, or a child being abused outside of a traditional public school setting in one of these other approved education programming, we are all mandatory reporters and have an obligation to make sure that we're looking out for our littles.
Other comments?
All right, thank you. Thank you. You stole my thunder. That's 169, I believe, isn't it?
I believe so. 169C.
Right, and also, back in my earlier travels, Mrs. Barrett from DCYF, and as far as homeschooling is concerned, they had one educational neglect in her tenure, so that says a lot.
So these bills, is it the amendment to amend the HB2 to match the bills?
Yeah, that's what the amendment would do, would replace section 163 in House Bill 2 with essentially the combination of 367, which goes from 350 to 350, 300 to 350% for the federal poverty income threshold, and then 464, which is essentially removing that 500% threshold on the expanded categories.
Okay.
So you would leave it in HB2.
Correct, and it would align with 367 and 464.
Right, to just make them align.
Okay, so moved. All right. Second by Dan. All those in favor? 4. All those opposed? 4-3. We move forward with that item. Okay.
So we have a number of additional items. I'm not, again, I don't know which ones we want to tackle first. I have until. Okay, so most of these are adequacy and we're not doing those today, I'm told. Okay.
I
Let me
think
just,
Building there, well, we can talk about court order placements, moving into the education trust fund.
168.
I think 164, maybe we could touch on real quick.
Okay, education trust fund, distributions and allowable uses.
Correct.
Oh, no, that's, okay, yes.
164. Actually, I'm gonna read. On page 58, so we're on page 58, education, sections 164, 167, education trust fund distributions and allowable usage. And I'm gonna let Caitlin kind of walk us through those.
So much of this is a kind of a rewrite of the allowable uses of the education trust fund funding, just to clarify the current uses of the education trust fund. Specifically, most of these programs are already being paid out of the education trust fund. The first one that we're discussing is just clarifying regular adequacy, the distribution of charter school aid. We actually referenced the wrong section of the law in the current law, so we're making sure we reference the correct section. Distribute public school infrastructure grants. Those are the grants we discussed in detail on Friday. Those are currently being paid out of funding that's being transferred from the education trust fund. So we thought it would be good to add it here as an allowable expense as well, but it's currently being paid out of with education trust fund money. The next on the list is to distribute kindergarten grants, again, already being paid out of the education trust fund. And at the time we had language, at the time when we had put it in the education trust fund as an allowable expense, the legislature, I think, was still very much up in the air on what kindergarten funding and grants would look like. So it was more general language, and we clarified now that we have a finalized kindergarten program. To continue on through the list, we allowed distribution of funds for RSA 194F, which is the education trust or education freedom accounts. Again, the education freedom account specifies that those funds should be paid out of the education trust fund under RSA 194F, which establishes the program. Distribution of lease aid to chartered public schools. This is a change the Department of Education requested in its budget. We felt that charter school lease aid should be paid out of the education trust fund rather than the general fund, as it is similar to the building aid program, and we felt like there was a lot of nexus there, and moved that to the education trust fund during this budget. It's $800,000 total appropriation in the education trust fund that used to previously be made in the general fund. Costs associated with the statewide assessment program, we discussed that in detail again on Friday. And then the one change that you'll see there, which is a change for just this biennium, is allowing the Education Trust Fund to pay for funding relative to career and tech education renovation programs. So those are kind of two different pieces that we can discuss in total. And then the last line in there is allowing the Department of Education to retain funding from the Education Trust Fund to administer Education Trust Fund programs. So those are all of the changes that we've made. Do we want to discuss any of those in detail or have questions of those in detail?
Question, Dan?
So just to make sure I understand, there is really only one new use that you mentioned. Everything else you are just asking for that chapter to be updated to reflect the various ongoing uses of the fund that kept being codified, by the legislature in various years. Right.
There's two new uses.
Two
So
new-
One is
two new.
the
leases?
aid, and the other is the administration.
Oh, sorry, I missed that
career-
one.
And the career and
Oh, the
tech.
CTE,
In the
right,
C-
okay. I was going to
CTE
talk
Okay.
about that even separate.
So, but basically, okay, I got it. I appreciate it.
and quarter replacements.
Mary?
Just could I ask, is this a section where 1% of the education trust goes to the Department of Ed?
This is correct.
I would ask that that be removed.
I actually would like to take a moment to kind of talk about that and relative to us writing that language. So we added this language to allow the department to have flexibility when we're administering a lot of these programs now.
Chairman Weiler actually brought up a pretty good point on Friday when he was talking about different programs and other people running programs other than the Department of Education, because then the Department of Education doesn't necessarily, the Department of Education continues to come back to the legislature and ask for positions as programs expand. So over time, the legislature has expanded many of these programs substantially. Adequacy is a great example. 10 years ago, when I was running the adequacy formula, it was a pretty basic formula. Now there are many sub-grants within that formula. There's a lot of data needs that are associated with it. There's a lot of technical assistance that is needed to be provided to school districts, to charter schools, to the legislature. And we have the same level of staff that are continuing to operate these exact same programs. Representative Weiler was talking about even though a program has doubled, the program hasn't come back and asked the department or asked the legislature for additional programs. That was because that program has an administrative set aside. And so that as the program grows and expands, an administrative set aside is actually an allowability of that program too, and allows the program to have that flexibility over time rather than coming back constantly to the legislature saying we need another position, we need another position. And overall, the department has not necessarily been as successful as getting positions that we need to operate programs, and this has been a huge constraint on department staff.
Actually, can I just add one thing to it? I mean, so this year, as an example, we are required under federally to publish our school performance report cards, and we were somewhat late getting those out simply because we didn't have the staff to do the data extraction and uploads. So
I understand, if I may,
Yeah, sure.
I understand all that, definitely. But to me, 1% is an open pocketbook. Let me finish, please. If you are seeking those additional positions, if you have needs, I can understand that. But this 1% is just nothing specified. I can't support that. There's, especially under the current administration, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult you, face up, but it's true. I know of no other department. That's a lot of money that you're asking for, especially right now. So I cannot support that 1%. And I know of no other department that from state public tax property funds would get, without specifications of what you're going to spend it on a yearly basis, if this is going on. I think it's wrong. I can't support it. I think I understand your needs. I get that. I've been there, done that, and we had a hard time even finding anybody. But we're in a climate right now where we are in good condition. We may not be in the future. 1% of a lot of money is without any specifications for how you're going to use it is too much for me to approve.
So all we're asking for is the authority to use this funding. We also would assume that we're not even at this time asking to appropriate those funds. We assume to use those funds, we would have to appropriate those funds too, which we would have to go and do a budget and say, this much money would go to class 10 or class 50 or whatnot. All we're asking for right now is the authority to, if we don't have the ability to potentially operate the programs with the staff and whatnot that we would need, we would, I'm guessing, come back to probably a fiscal committee or in a future budget, say, all right, we can have 1% of these funds, and then this is how we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I also do want to clarify that these would not be property tax funding funds, because these funds would be other revenue that's going into the education trust fund, as the property tax funds never go into the education trust fund directly. So the department would never have access to that. So we're not asking for no transparency. All of this funding would hit our state books. We would work with the legislature, like I said, probably through fiscal or other future, to do this. So And so when you're seeing, if you look at a budget for, say, like Title I, where, for example, where we have 1% of that $40 million to run Title I, you see the amount that's flowing through, and then you also see the amounts that are being retained by the department. And we would expect a very similar thing. So we are, at this point, we're just saying, just give us the ability to, and if we feel like we need to come to the legislature, we then have this kind of mechanism. Right now, we have no mechanism at all to fund positions and support for the department as we continue to grow these programs and continue to do the work to comply with the laws.
So if that is helpful, Representative Heath, even in my own, like, you know, I'm not too big on spending any more money either. So, but one of the things that, you know, appealed to me about this is it is consistent with the federal approach to trying to do it, right? We get a grant, then we get a percent set aside. As you know, that's how it works. And then what we have to do is we got to go argue. We don't have positions for this. So it's not like you can just, I can't go to spend it on something. I still would have to get this legislature to approve a position to be able to use for it. But I understand your concerns.
Dan?
Given that this is a new concept, and I appreciate the explanations, but I would appreciate if you wouldn't make a decision on it today. I kind of want to sleep on it and wrap my head around it a bit more. But this is very informational. It's just I don't feel personally ready to make a call on it right now, just because, you know, again, I need a bit more time. I find that when I sleep on stuff, I get a better idea by the next day.
What line is the 1% on? I'm trying to read this one. Okay.
If I may, while you're
Please.
doing that, for the record, will you say what 1% is?
$10 million approximately.
I'm sorry.
10 million. And the other question I had, I think we'll go back to this, but just since I have the mic on right now, apropos just for the biennium, the career and technical education renovation projects, are you specifically looking at Sugar Hill?
Yeah, in fact, that's one I did want to spend some time talking about. It specifically is the Sugar Hill project, which was not included in the capital budget. So we went to capital committee last week. Generally, the legislature funds 2 CTE center renovation projects per year. This year, one was included in, well, both were included in the agency budget. The governor pushed forward the Sugar Hill project because the Winnisquam had not yet received community approval. And because of the surplus funds that were available in the trust fund, he moved the Sugar Hill renovation into the education trust fund. And then we also spoke to the capital committee about the Winnisquam project. They would have their vote at the end of this month on like March 25th, I believe it is. What we want to just be careful of is that it doesn't get lost in the cracks between, you know, finance having it in terms of the use in the education trust fund and capital, and each committee imagining that the other body is taking care of it. But these are important projects for the state, and we hope that we're able to move those forward.
We spoke with the chair of Capitol
Okay.
yesterday. So
Okay, wonderful.
you won't see it twice.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm worried I don't see it at all.
Right, that's what the question I had was, to clarify, whether it comes out of capital, if it comes out of educational trust fund. In other words, you're saying it just can come out of education trust fund. Is that what you're saying?
It is certainly eligible to come out of the education trust fund, and again, we just are advocating that the renovation is funded, and we're not biased. We don't care where it comes from.
Right.
And I think the commissioner's office does a great job.
Sure.
Will this go through the same procedure as if it were a capital project? Does Sugar Hill do they have their ducks in a row, or are they kind of cutting the line here a little bit?
Nope, not cutting the line at all. They were in the queue, and we had proposed them as a capital project in our agency budget. They have all of their the information together. We can provide the committee with the specifications in terms of the drawings and the plans. They have already received voter approval for this, and they're just waiting for the legislative approval to move the project forward. That project is shovel ready. Like as soon as this gets approved on July 1, they can put a shovel in the ground.
Okay, my question on this 1% is, if that disappears, what does it do?
It doesn't do anything at this time because it's just allowing the department to use the money if we come to you in the future and ask for that. Right now, the department doesn't even have the authority to use that unless otherwise appropriated. It's just been historically, the legislature has been relatively adverse to adding new general fund positions to the Department of Education. However, has continued to add additional requirements and reporting and grants and whatnot to the Department of Education on existing staff. And so we're forced to do several different things. One, just put it on somebody else's general fund plate, and hopefully they have the time to do it. But then, you know, that tends to drive good employees out. 2, ask a federally funded employee to do that. And now that, which we can't do with time and effort, but even if they could, then they end up missing federal deadlines, which that's the commissioner just referenced. Or 3, not doing it at all, which if the legislature is writing a law and requiring the department to do it, we would like to comply with that law and that requirement, but we don't have the capacity to continue to do all of these things without additional support. So it's positions, it's some sort of authorization, and that's all we're kind of looking for going forward. Is that
Right, so there's no appropriation at this point in time. But if you didn't hear it in her voice, so Caitlin's feeling the pressure and because it falls to her department, right? Because we have a basic adequacy funding formula, and then we add differentiated aid, or then we add, relief aid and extraordinary needs grants, right? And every time you do one of these, like we have to go back and recalculate this for every single community, and it becomes difficult to keep up with you all, quite frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mickey, I understand. I'm troubled just by the language of how it's done. Is there another way to provide them with something, but not, $10 million is a lot of money on a yearly basis. Help me here.
So yes, this does set up similar to a federal or non-state funded program where you would have a cost allocation, you'd allocate state cost to a non-state non-state funded grant or flow of money. So this is trying to tap into state funds to fund something that is otherwise state funded: salaries, benefits, administration at the Department of Education. What could be done here is to add an allowable use of the Education Trust Fund be administrative costs at the Department of Education, subject to amounts appropriated. That way, it's not an open warrant, so to speak, and then whatever you appropriate, Caitlin had mentioned, they come and ask for positions, or whatever is funded in here could be Education Trust Fund as a source of funds. What we also heard from here is coming to fiscal. There's no law now that permits the Department of Education to come to get appropriations through fiscal, similar to how DOT does with the highway fund for winter maintenance, for instance. So if that's something the committee wanted to do, to give an option for the department to come to fiscal in between budget sessions, I guess that's something as well that you could do.
That would make me feel a real lot better. It would give you what you want. It would give you the authority to go to fiscal. I'd be really happy with that language rather than the 1%. I just can't do it. But I mean, I'm only one vote, so.
And I will say this section is still, there's a lot of other moving parts in here, depending on what this committee does with the rest of the Education Trust Fund programs. If you choose to switch them from general to education, there's been some talk about moving some programs from education back to general. So this would definitely be one you'd want to hold today. And we can work as a committee to deal with everything up to the 1% section, and then as that 1% section as well, something that works for the committee and the department perhaps.
If that is a comfort factor, let's go down that road.
So something to the tune of listing that let me back up. Administrative costs for the Department of Education as appropriated by the general court would be an allowable use, and then come up with something where fiscal could be, they could go to fiscal for additional funds above and beyond, at any other time.
So do you want to wait to vote till we have that amendment, or are you comfortable?
We would need, for that provision, we'll tentatively be okay with, but like I said, there's other things happening in here. For one, like this, so there's a lot of other programs that are going back and forth, general and education we've discussed. So once all those settle, this going to fiscal for DOE will be part of that amendment.
Okay.
I'm fine either way, but honestly, I think that language is probably the right way to go, and we don't have to finalize it today, but it's definitely something we should prepare and have it there, because it makes a lot of sense, and it does address the legitimate concerns that one may have over the current language. So I think it's a good
So
step.
if I can, if everyone just real quickly switches to page 6 of this packet, I think it's part of your package too, Commissioner. So this is the Education Trust Fund snapshot through the changes that this committee has made to this point. So if you look kind of starting on line 32, you'll see some of those programs have $0 in 23, but now you see them. So those are most of the ones that are being added. And that you'll see as we stand right now, there's $104 million of a surplus balance at the end of the biennium in the Education Trust Fund. This is where we've had past conversations as to what you want to do with that, whether you want to add more things to the education trust fund or move revenue and programs out of the education trust fund. So whatever you decide to do with this budget picture, this RSA, this section here should align with that. And I think we're not there yet.
Well, I think that finance chair is of the opinion that we got to whittle down the education trust fund to back what it was originally designed for and move a lot of this stuff back into general funds. But I don't think we're ready to do that this cycle. Okay, next section, next.
So I'm just skipping ahead. I actually have hard stop that I need to be able to get to. Tammy and Caitlin will be able to stay here and answer any additional questions, but I'm just trying to, are there any of these areas that specifically you want me to weigh in on for you? And I'm happy to jump ahead to those.
Could we do the court ordered placement and the new law that we just passed, and talk about how we're going to do that? I was thinking that maybe I don't know the language, Representative, your bill.
I'm just trying to remember the number, but yes.
So in that bill, there is going to be an allocation or authorization in allocation specified in court-ordered placements. That seems like a good place. Mickey, have you been working on that?
So it doesn't have a page number, but I think the last page of the paper clipped pack that I passed out this morning, I got a memo from Rebecca Ross. I hope it's part of your, I think it is. Rebecca Ross, who, if you recall, from Department of Health and Human Services, came and spoke to us about this last week. So she had thought, just off the top of her head, it could be around $2 million. She went back and crunched the numbers, and you can see it's more like $4 and then $5 million in the next 2 years associated with House Bill 521. So the details that she gave you there, or that gave us there, I think it's in each of your packets.
So yeah, it's in line 168.
So 168 in House Bill 2 takes the traditional court-ordered placements and moves that from the general fund to the education trust fund.
So just to explain what court order placements are for you. So I mean, these are basically students who are adjudicated by the court system, and the court places them in a particular education setting. It could be Sununu Center, or it could be some other setting. And by law, we're required to pay for the cost of those. And the way that works is, if we don't have enough money, we just draw a warrant and we're able to pay for them. Like, there's no limitation. However, whatever the judge orders, that's what we're required to pay. And so this has been moved from the general fund down into the education trust fund in this budget.
What was the bill number, Mickey?
House Bill 521.
Thank you. Sorry, too many bill numbers.
So we're expanding this.
We're not actually expanding it. Like, we generally are paying about that amount. So typically what happens, since I've been here through the last couple biennium, initially we were at we would budget like 1.5 million. And then we increased it to 2 million. We've been spending more than that, but when you're passing a budget, it's general funds. And so it's easier to pass it at 2 million. And then I just have to draw a warrant for the excess anyway. So it doesn't show up in the budget per se. So we're just giving you the number that we estimate what the cost will actually be. And then you'll appropriate whatever it is. And then we're going to spend
But
whatever
I
we
think
have
we were
to.
expanding it to include more than just court ordered.
Correct.
That's
House
what I
Bill
wanna-
521, Commissioner, adds episode of treatment to
Correct.
this. So, and that's the estimates that Ms. Ross from HHS has provided associated with that bill.
Okay.
So we were going to try to rename it as well. So it would be
Okay.
court ordered and
Episodes of treatment.
Episodes of treatment.
Okay.
And basically, the intent is to
Can I, so then I'm just going to clarify, because I know I am familiar with this legislation, and maybe I'm going to say what you were going to say, and I apologize. But I mean, essentially in addition to, we've historically had the court order placements, but what happens is, under the Fast Forward program, DCYF is able to place students. So a kid, calls in having a mental health crisis. There could be the rapid response team that shows up at their house. They could show up at one of our hospitals or Hampstead Hospital, and the Fast Forward team puts them into a specific, educational setting. And so it's not just the court, it's DCYF making those placements as well. So under this program, we would be required to pay for that as well.
correct, and that was the intent of the bill, right? I'm one of the co-sponsors, not the prime sponsor, but essentially the concept is that since the schools don't really have any control
Right,
over
say,
that
right.
placement, it is unreasonable to ask them to pay for it. So it is an expansion. It is very similar to the court order placement, but it is through a different program. And what Representative Heath was talking about is that we are trying to figure out the best way to the line item to put the funds in, not just the amount, but where to put them. And it does seem that since this entire statute works the same way, whether it's a court ordered placement or a placement for an episode of treatment, that we could use the same line item for both and just rename the line item to, court order or episode of treatment. And that's what we wanted to hear from you, whether you think that's the good practice or we should maybe keep them as two separate line items and then we'd have to change HB1. What are your thoughts on this?
So I prefer having the transparency and the visibility into them because court order placement is separate from an episode of treatment placement. And one is driving through the judicial system and others coming through Health and Human Services. And I think it's important as the legislative body to monitor, what these different, like to not commingle those and then we lose visibility.
So that would require a new section?
Yeah, so what we could do is just add a new accounting unit, House Bill 1.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone's in the mood to flip their big book open, but you'll see the court ordered placement account on page 1149. So we could set something up similar to that for the episode of treatment payments, if that works for the department.
It was so close.
It's budgeted as education trust funds now for court ordered placements to traditional. So this gets back to the conversation. It depends on what color of the dollar is that you're going to do with all these placement appropriations, and I'll take care of that when we get to that.
Okay.
So
I never meant to commingle the funds. I wanted them to be two separate entities. But that kind of authorization seemed to work well, that we could do the same kind of thing for
Yeah,
that
I
bill.
would think because it is an estimate, you'd probably
Yes.
want similar open warrant
Warrant,
language
yes.
for the department
Yes.
that should, how
Thank
much you
you.
allocate for this is not enough. They have a mechanism to draw
So
additional
don't
funds.
necessarily go along with these recommended dollars.
These are what we'll budget if the committee wants to. This is what will carry as a cost associated with House Bill 521, but they'll still have statutory authority to cover extra, yeah.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Mickey, right now the court order line item is 3015, the, court order placements. You were looking to create a 3016 or whatever the available code is that is consistent and matches all the chart of account specifications that would be treated in the same type of legal fashion as this, where we attempt to budget the exact amount, but we understand that we may not know, so we will leave the authority of the commissioner to draw as needed, because there is no way to accurately budget this type of stuff. But I would appreciate it if instead of being a bit optimistic to pass a budget and then knowing we'll overspend it later, to try to do our best effort to correctly estimate and put those numbers in the budget in the first place. And, then we can miss high, we can miss low, but I think that whatever number we put there should be our best estimate to, what we believe that may be, knowing that it's still a crapshoot at the end of the day and we do the best we can. But
Okay,
So toward that end though, so we estimate that our quarter replacements are going to be about $4.5 million. It looks like the HHS is estimating, between $3 and $5 million for the episode of treatment placement. So you'd want to make sure that you appropriate the full amount.
so we'll be looking at an amendment.
We'll have an amendment to House Bill 2 with all the content from 521.
Okay.
As well as the statutory language required. I think it's all covered. If I remember, the bill just added episode of treatment to the statute for court order replacement, so it probably already has that open warrant, but I'll double check that. And then I'll build a House Bill 1 account so you can see the separate appropriation for the episode of treatment versus the court ordered.
we may not need a major amendment because,
We're going to need an amendment.
we'll need, right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I
Sure.
just this becomes permanent? This is not for the biennium. This is a permanent change, or yes, anything is permanent. But going forward, the expectation is that this continues on.
That's our
Yes.
understanding. I mean, as long as like the fast forward placements and the episode of treatment placements take place.
What other item would you want to?
Is there any other specific items for me before I have to go?
Source of funding, we had talked about bringing it back to general fund or education trust. I think right now I'm fine with the education trust.
Yeah.
We have money. We might not in future years, and I think another another session can change that.
Agreed. Okay. Moving right along.
Okay,
Is there an item you'd like to discuss, or are you all set?
I'm all set. Let me just go through my other page quickly. Have we spent enough time on, so everybody understands the Sugar Hill, right? So I don't have to talk about that one.
Right.
No, I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before the commissioner heads out, just looking at the very bottom of page 2, the change to revenue distribution of BPT, BET between general fund and education trust fund, which is something that, we were talking about not deciding anything today, but I just wanted, while he's here, whether he has any thoughts on, those strategies of funding and, any thoughts on that topic.
So the only thing I'll say relative to that, and it's kind of following up the previous conversation that we had when I was in this committee, is just what we have is when these things were set up, we had funding sources that inherently are growing, right? So as our economy grows and we expand more, you're going to see an increase in the funding that comes in. Inherently, my population of students is going to contract and get smaller. And so those two are going to probably continue to diverge. So as you consider how you put funds into that education trust fund, we want to try and balance based on what we think the needs are going to be. And those needs are going to be based upon the numbers of students as well as the programs that you decide to fund out of there.
And I think the governor's budget reduced it to 65% of previous numbers.
Yeah, the governor's recommended budget changes the business tax allocation to 65-35, which over the biennium is about $150 million of revenue that would go to the general fund versus the education trust fund. And you do see that adjustment on lines 15 and 16 on that schedule, on page 6, the education trust fund schedule.
Okay. Yes,
I
ma'am.
know you don't want to hear from me anymore.
You're on a roll.
I can't help myself. This is an anomaly, though, this year. The last few sessions, for us to have the amount of funding that is in the education trust, we're going to be heading into a recession. I think, we've all been watching the news about what's happening to the banks. There are some concerns about what's going on. My concern is that by limiting the amount of money going into the education trust, we might be shorting ourselves in case of a recession, and we'll end up, but we have the authority to take money from the general fund. So that's there, but I just want to go on the record as uncomfortable with doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, Caitlin, back in the hot seat.
So which items, where do we go now?
You're up to 165, 167.
So building aid, they acted on that last week, though.
So building aid, to this point, the committee has decided to remove the $75 million transfer to the new building aid fund. I don't know if you have any questions for the department relative to the amounts that are in House Bill 1 new projects. There's still about $46 or $48 million in House Bill 1 new projects for this biennium. I think they had spoke to that last time they were in,
Right.
but I don't know if you have any other follow-ups relative to building aid.
No?
Just a reminder, that is the tail, the debt service, and then money for new projects as well.
Right. Mary?
I would like to, in that we still have remaining funds in the trust, I would like to be able to add to the existing dollars in building aid so that we could cover at least 5 to 6 projects. And I know that Concord's a big one, so maybe it would just be adding Concord in this biennium, if that would be a possibility for us to consider. Thank you,
I
Mr.
think
Chair.
Concord was like 37 million, wasn't it?
So, if I could ask, I know that you told us when you gave us that summary that those are the requests, and I understand that. But it looks to me like it should be possible to prepare for us a, if not fully accurate, a much closer to reality estimate of what money they may end up being eligible for based on their number of students and square footage and cost per square foot. Would it be possible for the committee to receive an updated, summary which contains that estimate rather than the current
Yes.
way over, requests? Because it's kind of hard to decide if, we are so far off the mark.
We're in the process of going through and doing that calculation. I think we are down to number 5 on the list, which is Litchfield. So we can give you at least the first 5 updated to give you what that number is. Amy is
Would it
working
be
on that.
possible to have a few more, maybe,
Well-
even if it's a ballpark? We're not looking for something that would be binding to those, just a closer estimate. That's all I'm asking for.
So it takes a lot of time for the department to do that
Mm-hmm.
estimate. That's what she's in the process of doing, is going through and reviewing all of the expenses and determining what they are and are not eligible for. So she can't rush it. So she's
Understood.
done at least 5, maybe 6 or 7. It depends on really how much time. So I will get the updated numbers with those numbers, knowing that the schools still do have the ability to ask for waivers and whatnot. But I can get you the first 5.
Thank you. Just looking for better quality data, understanding it's not going to be perfect, but anything that improves the quality of the data would be welcome. And as those things get updated, if you could just keep updating us throughout without us having to ask anytime, a new school is done, if you could update that and send it to us. I know that we don't have a lot of time, but, there is a lot of variability in that data, and we understand that, so it's
And I
tough.
think that would give us an opportunity to allocate more funding.
And so just a reminder that there's a cap in law of $50 million. So all you would need to do is do a removal of that cap one time, which I believe you did in House Bill 2 for this fiscal year, I think, or fiscal year 22. So you would just remove that cap and then appropriate whatever you want to appropriate.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, yeah. Bill?
Right, well, we got $227 million worth of asks, for building aid. And we we never cover, 3 out of 17? I mean, so maybe we ought to think of the way we change. We got some,
I think that's Mary's point.
right, we can't fund them all, but
No.
somebody's gonna get cheated out of the system, so maybe we should target aid to all schools and let it go with that, and then have it in that fund, capital reserve fund.
More to follow,
I'm sorry,
more to follow.
more to follow, right?
No, and there's more to follow on that discussion.
Right. Well, maybe we should head in that direction, and the tail we got to take
There's
care of that.
already an amendment drafted.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you.
Yes,
But, Mr. Chair, thank you. I will perseverate on my same comment that I continue with. School districts have been on a moratorium for 10 years. There are projects that have gone unfunded. We saw with Mike Cahill's bill, we know we couldn't go back and do retroactive, but we have an opportunity. We have some money right now. If we can put a few more projects in, and for this session, I know you're thinking about changing the manner in which building aid is going to go out, but just for this biennium, if we could at least look at putting a few more dollars in building aid, well, more than a few more millions, I should say, just so that we can fund a few more of those projects that have been on the waiting list and have gone through the process with Amy and have been vetted thoroughly, that we could get them into the works just now. And I know you're talking about other things, but just for this, now that we have funding in the education trust, that we could do this now.
I think that's our intent.
Oh, thank you.
Question?
Yeah, thank you. I guess just, I want a little clarification yet again. It seemed our goal was to try to get more building aid in this biennium, which is why we moved the funds up a little bit. And I guess I still would like to see, I guess I would like a recap of where we are on that. And apropos what Representative Heath was saying, there may be new methods or methodologies to consider with regards to building aid. But I think that's a longer and larger conversation with regards to unintended consequences. And if I can just point out the discussion we had last week about the accounting plans that were thrown in and caused a huge uptick and a great deal of extra work on people, I think before we do anything, there needs to be a good long conversation about with Department of Education about what those unintended consequences are. So I am very leery about any major change at this point. For that reason, I can pretty much guarantee there will be unintended consequences if we don't do our due diligence first. And that this is a great opportunity to get some of this money directly out to some of the schools who have been waiting for a long time to do a building project. Thank you.
I agree. Well, we're kind of in a holding pattern on that one. So what's next?
I didn't have the department prepared to dive into adequacy today. I
Okay.
didn't think we were gonna have time, or I didn't think that conversation was ready
Are there
for
any
today.
other items on here that we could,
Section
dispose of?
178, Caitlin?
Reference to charter schools. So, 178 gives the department flexibility to make changes and go to fiscal to ask for additional funding if we are in violation of our maintenance of effort relative to some of the federal stimulus education programs that are going on right now. We are still in a holding pattern with the U.S. Department of Education to find out if we would potentially be in a violation of maintenance of effort. This is carryover language from the last biennium. So basically the legislature said, you know, if the U.S. Department of Education determines that you're in violation, we will give you at least the flexibility to come to us to ask for more money. So that's all we're asking, is to continue to hold over that language as we're still kind of in that holding pattern. And then the one change is we did note that last time we had only specified for district schools, and we needed to add in the chartered public schools as well, because those schools also receive stimulus funding. So that's all that language is doing, is just updating that charter school language and continuing forward that language to give us the flexibility to go to fiscal if it's needed from US DOE.
okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of section 178? Okay, unanimous.
Can I just ask a quick question to Caitlin? Is that chapter law? So if you look on here, I know there's a type of drafting error. If you look on page 68, line 28, it says amend session law 2001. It was actually session law 2021. So we could clean that up. I just want to confirm, is that the maintenance of equity authority that you have for the biennium only last year?
It would only be needed for the biennium because I think the federal law is only looking at those 2 years.
Okay.
So I don't know if we would need the authority to go back, if we should clarify that, but the calculation is relative to the 22 and 23 school years.
Okay. No, I think we're good with this. You can accept this as is. I'll clean up that typographical error on line 28.
Any other items you're comfortable bringing forward? We're in a get her done kind of mood today.
I see that and I appreciate it.
Yeah, because we're losing tomorrow.
If you have questions about the Medicaid Direct Cert, I see that's listed here. Nikki, is that something that's coming up?
On what, I'm sorry?
Medicaid direction.
No, I think we talked that one to death. Yeah. Is that a section?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask about the cap again? I know building aid we need to wait on. Is a decision about removing the cap for the biennium part of that discussion? So
Yes.
that be
Thank you.
included, not separate?
Yeah.
Correct. I don't know if I just messed something up. There's a little dial that I just moved on the bottom of that, so. Maybe it's just volume, I'm not sure.
So is
So
this
on page, sorry.
Go ahead.
On page 3, line 43, when Caitlin was with us Friday, she discussed the public school infrastructure. So that's still a pending the $5 million a year relative to that request. I don't know if you have any more follow-up questions for Caitlin. We dove into that last week. If not, we can move on to the, you're good with that? The accountability position, I think that request will go away as well based on the conversation that we had as far as repealing the accountability plans relative to the extraordinary needs grant.
Right.
So as part of this committee's adequacy amendment, however big or small that is, that'll be part of that.
That'll be part of that.
Yep.
Okay.
And then that brings us to lines 45 through 48, which tie to those two schedules that I just provided, and the department can speak to the request of the
I
positions.
do want to clarify one thing with as far as adequacy and whatnot is that there's a version of a bill that came over from the House that has accountability plans tied to relief aid too. So if you keep accountability plans and relief aid, then it would also need, or the Sally Fellows bill. Right. So I'm saying, so that position would be needed for that if you were to establish that too. So we'd be back to that kind of circular conversation. Just Keep that in
The
mind.
language is abolish it everywhere.
so, and then, so the, yeah. So did the committee continue to have questions from the conversation we were having last week relative to the positions? You know, we kind of discussed them last week.
But these are not in HB2, HB1.
So this would be an increase to our appropriation in HB1 for general funds for these various different lines relative to increases across the department relative to hiring needs the department has done in fiscal year 23. They will have impacts on 24 and 25.
Okay, I remember that discussion. Question, Dan?
Just was gonna say that we did follow up, at the end of the meeting, because I wasn't sure during that original discussion why they were not included, and it was made clear that the timing of the budget process made it impossible for this to be caught in the budget. So I'm completely satisfied that, this is the best we can do it, approve them at this time and they are needed positions. So I'm 100% fine with this.
But these were not in the governor's budget.
They were not in the governor's budget, no. The positions themselves were. The hiring decisions have been made in the last several months since we last updated the numbers for the governor's budget.
Okay, Mary?
I think this is kind of a simple conversation. It's simply a matter of the individuals who were hired to fill those positions came in at a much higher rate
Correct.
than was budgeted. I think the state maybe ought to change that, how they budget positions, because this is a direct cause of that. So it's an adjustment based on the new hirees. And in order to meet their budget, they need to make these adjustments. Am I correct?
Correct.
So what's the motion on this one?
So you could accept the changes in these two sheets. It'll be a cost of about $1 million in general funds, and we would add $190,000 in federal as well to the budget. That would all be in House Bill 1.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay. Unanimous.
I got it.
And on page 4 of this document, I don't know if the department has any thoughts on line 63 relative to the bill to appropriate money to codify the education laws and rules, as well as line 69, which was House Bill 542 that established the new data analyst position.
So this committee will remember about a month or two ago, I testified on that bill. That was a bill that I had worked on with Representative Greg Hill for the recodification anyways. We have had, continue to have conversations. I know people have continued to do research. I think that the general consensus across the board from everybody on whatever side of the political fence is that the education rules do certainly need to be looked at, potentially recodified. I think there are some concerns maybe relative to the process and the costs. The point of the bill was really to start having that conversation. It sounds like this is not going to be enough money, which we anticipated that originally. We just kind of put something down. But something, we are at a point where something needs to be done about the education laws, rewriting them in complete kind of form so that we're not just doing this one-off piece by piece.
Well, I spoke to Representative Hill on Friday about this, and he indicated somebody was was supposed to have given me a number. And I don't know I don't remember who he said. But apparently there's some activity still going on, but we don't have any, let's see what that number ultimately is, because if it's like $10 million, we'll say, whoa, that's a big number.
I might suggest maybe rewriting this language to be something like require the department to put out an RFP to do the work and then come to fiscal with the amount in the RFP to determine if that amount is reasonable or not.
That works.
I would probably support something like that because honestly, this is not going to work the way it's written. I appreciate the intent, but I could argue that this is either way too low for what you really need to do and way too high for what you can do. So this is just, a conversation starter. But getting an RFP at least brings this to fiscal, who can say yay, nay, or cut it down and just start the process. So I would totally authorize the department to put an RFP out and go to fiscal as suggested and take it from there.
So then what we would do is we would amend that bill. No, we'll just put it to HB 2. Yeah, okay. Mary?
I think we also talked a lot about this is happening across the state with regard to lots of different departments. So could this be more of a overall Department of Ed being the first one to do this, to establish the protocol by which the recodification of statutes could be affected? I don't know if that makes sense.
And I think from our work session on this, there was discussion whether this should be a Department of Education initiation or Office of Legislative Services. And we had Director Alaconis in here, if you recall. So perhaps Representative Hill was referring to Director Alaconis relative to maybe working on some information relative to this bill, and I can check with them.
But I think to Mary's point, if we make this general, not just Department of Education, but any department, authorize the department to get an RFP and take it to fiscal. That would help Department of Transportation, could help safety, could help.
And that's and perhaps we run it by Director Alaconis, because it may make more sense for one person or one office to do
I
that
agree.
for all versus it just scattered around state government.
Fine,
So maybe we'll touch base with him to see if he has any information.
okay.
And I don't know if Charlie Arlinghouse needs to be part of that conversation because it kind of impacts the way the state works. So I don't know, just adding that.
Well, they're the ones that actually do all the contract review.
I'm sure Director Alukonis will, follow up with Mr. Arlinghouse or anybody else who they should follow up. I mean, he would know who to talk to give us the proper feedback.
I don't think there's anybody that has said that there's no point in doing this. every time I've heard somebody talk about the bill,
People who never read the statutes may disagree, but when you actually try to read them, it's...
right.
Any other items?
So there's other position, HB 542, new DOE data analyst position. So this position was something that Representative Ladd had put in. It's unique that the New Hampshire Department of Education does not have a research and data analyst arm. Most Department of Educations, I think, have a relatively large one. And Representative Ladd was... Really, it came out of Representative Ladd was at the Department of Education asking for people to do X, Y, and Z. And I had said, well, we don't have staff that are dedicated to doing that. And if you wanted that to be a function, because he wanted some reports, he wanted some substantial data analysis on education, just using our statistics. I said, if you really want this on an ongoing basis and the committee's wanting the support and whatnot, then there should be a position established full time. And he said, yes, and I want that position and that because he wants the results of that.
Right.
So.
I like that motion based on our previous conversation. This is a much needed position. And
I'll second the motion since this is a 20-0 bill in committee that passed on the consent calendar. I mean, we got to fund it, period, end of story.
I'm looking at Mickey because he's the man that gets this all done.
Yep, so we'll put this in House Bill 2. It's up to the committee whether you want to fund this position in the budget or just put it as a House Bill 2 appropriation. There's really no right or wrong there. We can keep it in House Bill 2 that way.
How
We're not
about
taking-
529?
Well, wait a minute, we can vote on that.
Oh, all in favor?
Makes a difference. I think we
Yep, that's fine.
We'll point out the bill appropriated lower numbers and what the department is saying is the actual cost. So the bill appropriated $160,000 and $145,000 respectively for the next 2 years, and you'll see on line 69 there, DOE estimates 183 about per year. So,
Use their estimates.
yep.
Yeah, 529.
529. That's,
This is an ed funding bill. I'm not sure how much you want to get into that today.
oh, okay.
Yeah, that one,
Adequacy.
Oh, that's adequacy.
that's an adequacy
Okay.
bill, correct?
I like 529.
Seems like everybody does.
So 529, maybe Caitlin can speak to the components that it adds.
The
It
more,
actually,
yeah.
So 529 keeps the formula the way it currently is. It's different than the governor's proposal. So just a reminder on the governor's proposal. The governor's proposal is really to simplify the adequacy formula, get rid of some of the other kind of pots of money, and expand base aid and free and reduced lunch, annual increases to school, and then as hold harmlesses go away, increase the extraordinary needs grants over time. So that's what the governor's proposal does. 529 is a different kind of funding proposal that leaves the base amounts the same, leaves free and reduced lunch the same, leaves third grade reading in the formula currently, leaves extraordinary needs grants in, leaves stabilization grants in, leaves relief aid in, and then adds fiscal capacity disparity aid, which is an old section of the formula that existed prior to 2012 and it was removed in 2012. It is largely based on median family income and equalized valuations, and it allocates approximately $100 million of additional aid to school districts across the state. Is that correct? 100, that's a fiscal note.
Well, just one quick comment slash question here. I remember that during the original, time when we had the public hearing on the bill, I did ask the sponsor whether, at the time when they designed it, the governor budget was not known. So the bill is both intending to change the way the aid is allocated and to increase it. The governor already increased the aid by a lot. So I would like to, see if you have any thoughts on, whether, the increase in the bill is something that, we still need to add to the governor budget or not, because I'm quite uncomfortable with that. But just trying to understand your thoughts on the bill, both in terms of the quality of the formula and in terms of the amount of additional funding now that we know the existing governor budget, because this was designed when the governor budget was not known, the bill.
That is correct. I think this is probably not the answer the committee is going to want, but the formulas are just different and they do different things. And so really what there are two separate policy decisions that the legislature needs to decide which direction they're going in, whether it's increasing base funding to all schools in the constitutional cost of an adequate education versus giving additional funding on the quote unquote right side of the formula, which is not part of a constitutional adequate education. So those are two separate ideas that that should be discussed.
Just one quick follow-up, and that's I'm new here question. Can you point out to me why the right-hand side is the constitutional aid and the left-hand side is the constitutional adequate funding and the right hand is not? Because in my head, everything you send to the school is education aid, and
So
could you help me understand that?
of course, I don't have my wonderful law book in front of me, but RSA 198, I think 40, defines what the constitutional cost of an adequate education is and calculates the constitutional cost of adequate education, and that's what that amount is. And then everything else is an additional it's confusing because it's called an adequate education grant, but that is outside of the constitutional obligated amount.
That's why I'm asking, because I'm a bit confused and clarification is welcome. I appreciate it. I'll continue
And
to
it's
dig offline.
confusing too,
Right.
especially just with the terminology being very similar and kind of overlapping.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Third grade how valuable do you think how much effect does that have, that money And if we take it away, what's that gonna do?
So the third grade reading money, which I think is
I know, that's why I'm asking.
so I think it's approximately $1.5 million in the current formula, and it goes to only about 1,500 kids because of the way the calculation is done. The third grade reading amount, you are only eligible to receive that amount if you're also not free and reduced lunch, special education, or an English language learner. So there's approximately 6,500 kids that would actually be eligible for this aid, but because of those additional kind of collars on the funding, not everybody is receiving that funding. So if the funding is truly going to increase third grade reading, there's a lot of kids that are not proficient that are not benefiting from those dollars at this time.
So if I may follow up, do you think it's not really effective? I mean, $1.5 million I mean, we're helping them in other ways anyway, so.
So the governor's proposal reduces that basically in that exact line of thought that the funding could be used elsewhere.
So we leave it on the table.
Yes. Yeah. I think ed funding adequacy is still wide open right now for discussion.
Yeah. So anything else we can cover today?
No.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy today's snow.
I always will. I love snow.
I got a feeling Mickey's got some other stuff for us.
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna pass something out real quick, just relative to 529. So, very simply, the current law includes two enhanced aid grants as part of the ed funding formula. One is based on free and reduced lunch populations. One is based on equalized valuation per pupil. 529 introduces a new aid grant based on free and reduced lunch populations and one based on equalized valuations per pupil. It's, to me, very duplicative. So I'm going to provide the language that's in current law and the language that's in 529, just so you have it, so you can see how similar the
Okay.
proposal from the current law is.
So we may be repeating the same mistakes.
Not necessarily mistakes.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
You may be able to get to the essence of 529 by just tweaking current law.
Okay.
Implementing something.
But as part of that conversation too, Mr. Chair, I'm confused about the hold harmless in 529. Because I think the hold harmless, even though 529 does a number of things, then hold harmless also does some things. So how do those two interact? And how do we end up?
I think my perception is that hold harmless is just another name for, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. Yeah.
If I may, with one difference, that stabilization was designed to be permanent, while the hold harmless is designed to be temporary. And as the funding rises, hold harmless should slowly or fast disappear, right? That, to me, that is the difference, and that's why I'm going to use different terms, but the goal is the same.
If you will, thank you. If you remember, we tried to reduce hold harmless or stabilization, 4% per year and then we got rid of it, 2018. So, I mean, I don't know why. Maybe somebody can answer that question.
I wasn't here.
Well, Mickey, do you know why it was taken away, or just?
That was the
Went the whim.
legislative decision. I can't speak to intent,
okay.
but yeah, that was just when the formula was redone, 2018, 19, whatever that was, the stabilization decrease was essentially repealed and restored back to the full amount at that time when they did the formula. And I think I've said this before, you're probably sick of hearing it. The last time the education funding formula was the same statutorily for 2 consecutive years was fiscal 12 and 13. So every single year since then, it's been a different way of calculating ed funding. So it's hard to remember each year why a change was made and what that change was, but
Okay. Looks like you've got some good.
I do. I'm going to kind of go, we're going to be all over the place a little bit, try to get as much done today as we can. First things first, House Bill 129 relative to the hygiene products. I have that amendment.
Okay.
I think we just want to take a look at that, be good with that, and then essentially reconsider our previous action of retaining this bill, and then we can bring this amendment as ought to pass as amended next door across the hall on Wednesday for the full committee.
On this one, I think if I recall our discussions yesterday correctly, the committee was leaning more towards just clarifying the language that instead of, you know, that this is just removing the language that says in the bathrooms. Right. All right. So that's the amendment. Okay.
And changed girls to menstruating students. So, any comments? We have a motion to adopt amendment 0933H. Joe? Okay, do I have a second? Mary? All those in favor? Opposed? Good. Okay.
Do we need to reconsider the first, or was that just still sort of an informal?
I think we'll just make it clear that this bill is no longer retained. The recommendation is ought to pass as amended.
Yep.
And we'll talk about that across the hall Wednesday.
Okay.
So also just to confirm, the episode of treatment bill that we're good with, that's going to go in House Bill 2 along with the appropriation in House Bill 1. So we got that done. I do have, if you recall, so on page 1 of our packet for today, page 44, section 121, the DOT relative to the rights of way, the prime wetlands. I did get a response from the department and a proposed change that, you know, that maybe you could consider based on the conversation.
What would they say? Trying to read the things.
What it did is it gives
Oh, yeah.
DOT.
I know what that part is.
Yeah.
But what, then they were in agreement?
Well, he wanted to define prime wetlands. Yes.
Can I,
question.
speak to this? I have a hard time supporting this. I'm a big fan of DOT, and it's my, I am a fan of Quinn, we all get along really well. I don't think that DOT should get a buy from protecting the prime wetlands. A lot of what DOT does damage to the wetlands, and when they're doing their work, I think they should be respectful of the value of the prime wetlands. And so I don't think they should be exempt from taking care of them when they're doing their maintenance within the prime wetlands area. So I don't think I can support this.
Gary?
I was of the opinion that all this did was eliminated a couple of the steps that they could get around the law, if you want to call it that, and do what they needed to do. This would just eliminate a couple of steps and make their job easier. That's the way I understood it. I might be wrong. Thank you.
Gary?
Well, if
You
I
go.
can just respond, when he says, the change will clarify the department does not need to adhere to stricter wetlands requirements. So to me, it gets around what they should do. It gets around what they're required to do what they want to do. They're able to do what they need to do while they are taking the prime wetlands into consideration. And so I don't think it's just like paper steps that they have to skip through. I think that they're actually changing what they would do when they're doing the work. And so I have a problem with that. I think what they're doing around the wetlands really does have an impact on the wetlands, and I think it's our responsibility to protect those. And if it's a little bit longer work for them, I'm sorry, but it may cost a little more now. It may cost a lot more when we damage our wetlands later on.
I think it was not having to get local planning board or conservation commission
That's it.
approval.
That's the, that was key. That's,
Yes.
I missed the impetus, how this fell on our lap, who is requesting this change? Is the actual DOTs requesting this? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
If I may, I mean, my understanding of this, and I would appreciate if somebody would correct me if my recollection is not accurate, is that this is intended to clarify that people cannot come after the fact when all this have already been established and come now designated as a prime, wetland, and change the rules and basically make it impossible for the department to use existing wetland easements. Isn't that what this was all about?
No, this is like a culvert. If they need to repair a
But it's for existing things. It's things that are already in place.
Maintaining existing things.
Right.
which should be,
But that isn't that the fact that those things, the easements have been in place before, and and then this is declared prime wetland, and now people change the rules, and the department cannot do their maintenance work anymore.
They have to coordinate with the town.
They are coordinating with the town, but it's just if this is done post facto, it could essentially be a way for the department to lose access to, culverts and easements that they need to use.
As a real estate attorney in my former life, who practiced, real estate property law, I think there are important processes in place under current statute that require the DOT to go through a formal administrative request to go outside of the, specified law if they want to do, additional, incursions into these wetland areas to maintain their infrastructure. So I think, those important steps have been put into law in the past because there has been a perceived need for that, give and take of local conservation commissions weighing in and other stakeholders being able to say, hey, this particular piece of wetland property has specific characters. The DOT needs to come to us and we need to have that conversation. I think by changing the statute, by allowing them to have that waiver without that conversation, it could be detrimental. And so I think while it may make the DOT's administrative burden a little lighter, I think that there's important reasons for having that conversation take place. And, through those steps that they'll need to go through. So, understanding, how projects develop over time and can have specific characters for each, characteristics for each project, given the wetland area and surrounding easements or, just the actual, these land survey maps that you look at, they can change in character over time given, changes of our climate or changes of the water, riparian kind of flows. So, I know there's a specific need to go through these steps each time. So I think giving the blanket waiver could potentially have a lot of detrimental effects that we're not really prepared to understand in our capacity, just sitting from a fiscal committee perspective. I think, my inkling is to say that the processes in place have been put there for a purpose, and I'd like to support that. I'm not sure that the DOT should have a blanket waiver without, really investigating each change that they need. And so, I personally couldn't support this. I don't think that that's a wise decision for our state because I just know there are so many particular perspectives that need to be taken into account when you go through these changes. And, as someone who's worked on both sides of litigation related to this, I think it's important, making a big change like this could have big implications. And I just caution everybody from making a huge sweeping change that's not going to be helpful.
I would just like to note that I would prefer if we don't decide this today, I feel the need to do more homework and go back to the hearing and review the tape of what was said at the time to refresh my memory. My recollection right now is just not accurate enough to be able to decide on it right now.
I think this wasn't his only portion. This was one small piece of the whole section, wasn't it?
There were multiple sections relative to rights of way changes. So 2 of the 3 we were good with as a committee, and those were accepted. This third one was put on hold.
From the sounds of things, I think it could stay on hold. Or do we have to delete it?
If you still want to discuss this at a future time, whether it stays in or not, you can just keep this topic on hold. Deleting it from House Bill 2 is always an acceptable option for the committee too, if that's the direction you want to go. So what you have is language the governor put in House Bill 2, and then before you propose change that language, the department provided at the end of last week. So
Now, it says nor to provide mitigation, which is a problem. I mean, we do want mitigation. And I think that the local communities should have input because they know better than DOT or anyone else the state of their wetlands. And I'm thinking in particular, we're going through a process right now, environmental process, we're not doing anything in Newcastle, but we have a wetland that is likely changing from a freshwater wetland to a saltwater wetland. And it requires different information, different stuff. And I really think it's important to have the local communities involved when you're working in those areas. You've got culverts that, especially with Newcastle, we've got culverts that are really small and falling in, which need major repair. And I think we have that all across the state. And I think it's really important that we adhere to protecting those wetlands.
Okay,
I got a question
yeah.
or a comment. Right. I think it sounded like the DOT is rogue in its actions. And that's not necessarily true because they have to go by a scope of work and they have experts that handle these things and they do an excellent job. That's why we have good roads and we do have, and they know the differences. And I think their conservation commissions are great. They're not necessarily staffed by expert people. And, I think this is another step because every time you increase a step, you increase the cost. And I observed firsthand when they were building the Spalding Pike. I happened to stop by my son's office who worked for the state as an engineer. And they look at turbidity of the water. I mean, they have to go by federal law too, because you got, safe water, considerations. But I mean, there's silt fences, there's all kinds of things. It's not just, they don't just go in there and, dig something up and let it go, but they have to go by certain rules, even so. So, we don't want to add more cost.
As a bridge, we're not going to cross today.
all right, sounds good. I'll point to a couple of things on this document we could probably deal with on page 3, line 42. You'll see something new here. It came to our attention in accounting unit 5032 that there was for lack of a better term, I think it was keying error, and some highway funds ended up in this accounting unit, but there shouldn't be highway funds in there. So you actually can make this adjustment here and improve the highway funds position by $66,000. Not huge, but it cleans it up and you gain a couple bucks.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, done.
I'm going to bounce all over the place here. So if you look up on the same page, line 19, if you recall, we approved this. It's other funds. This is the fire fund that's administered by the Department of Safety. They had asked for these positions. During that discussion, it was asked if part-time money could be reduced to offset the full-time. The department did provide a memo here. I'll just summarize. They do say that their preference is to do the action that you already took, and the fire fund could absorb that action without an issue, but I will give this just so their follow-up is on record with you.
What's the action that we already took?
Oh, we're done. We're done with that.
Yeah.
That one.
19. 19, page 3. Oh, actually. Whatever we do.
If you could clarify for my recollection, what is that we already did? Because I don't have those notes in front of me.
On page 3, you'll see on line 19, we added funding for 3 fire service instructor positions out of the fire fund. And then during that conversation, when these items were discussed, it was asked if part-time money could be reduced since they were considering adding full-time. The action that the committee took is the preference of the department, but they did follow up with information. They weren't aware that you had taken that action Friday, I think. So when I had updated Steve today, he had provided this memo. So we thought we would complete the request for the follow-up information, but you don't have to do anything if
The
you choose not
intent
to.
of this memo, if I read it correctly, because I'm just seeing it, is to say that they are capable of funding two of those positions from their existing funds by transferring from the part-time, and they are just requesting one position. Right, and I would move that we make those changes because, right, I'm sorry, never mind me. That's why I was asking, what did we already do? So,
This stuff for information only, just so you'd have this complete response
you.
from them. I
oh,
feel
so
if
this
you
was
have to
their
do anything-
confirmation that what we did on Friday
You're good.
is totally fine
Yeah,
with them.
and to the extent that the fire fund does have any appropriations that aren't expended, it's a non-lapsing fund. It stays in there. They administer it. They keep track of the balance. That's their responsibility over
Thank
there.
you for clarifying. Was a bit lost.
Don't have anything else that is, in my opinion, a softball, I guess, just to clean up either in House Bill 1 or 2 or any of our retained bills. I don't know if there's anything more the committee wants to do today. I know we have a public hearing in about an hour and 45 minutes
In the rep hall.
in Reps Hall. So that's where we're at.
I think we ought to make book on what the topics are going to be. I'm joking.
So I guess one thing is, so we're not going to meet again until Friday. Is there anything specific that you want to work on Friday while we're in committee I can have prepared?
Just getting stuff done.
I am available.
What do you think, Nick?
It's it's hard to predict the pace that we'll go on Friday and how prepared we are to make decisions. A lot of the decisions remaining are, so looking on page 3 here, there's a lot of general and highway funded requests from the Department of Safety. You do have some fish and game requests here that are mainly general funds. They're not huge dollars. I think one of the directives or directions that I think the full committee is hoping is any additions you make, you're also making corresponding reductions somewhere and doing net zero, which we haven't really been doing to this point, outside of the $75 million in the education. There's a lot of money in the education trust fund right now. So unless we start doing funding swaps, moving some of the education trust fund out into the general fund and using the general fund for some of these, so there's a lot of potential moving parts here. There's a lot of ways to go about this.
So you think if we devoted 4 or 5 hours to it on Friday, we would be able to resolve it?
I think if anyone had any initiatives that you want to propose for Friday to discuss versus, so if we came in with an amendment or came in with a proposal, perhaps we could do that Friday. I worry that if we came in and started a conversation from scratch on Friday, we probably wouldn't get too far. But if we had documents to work off of, some proposals or amendments, I think we could be productive Friday.
I don't know that we have any.
We don't right now. No, then that's what I'm saying. So, flipping over to page 6, we can see we've got an education trust fund with $100 million sitting in there. So some of those proposals or some of those programs funded in there, we've talked about increasing increasing school building aid, for instance, or changing ed funding. Those would obviously impact your bottom line. We've talked about moving some revenues out of the education trust fund. So those types of proposals, if anyone has anything like that, I'm not sure where we're at, I guess, with that conversation.
What if we posted it for Saturday, and if we don't need it, just don't go, I mean, that would work.
I think we'd know Friday if there was benefit to coming in the next day or not, or waiting until Monday. So
But when is the deadline for posting it in the calendar?
it's 24 hours to post any meeting, but we can, I'll have Janet post it today, so at least it's on the digital calendar.
okay.
I'd also recommend, Mr. Chair, at this point with our budget work sessions, that you recess versus adjourn or end. So that way, for instance, we don't have anything scheduled on Wednesday. But if we fly over across the hall and get done very early and you did want to call Division Two together, we could if you recessed today,
Well,
as an
at
example.
the end of today, which we're rapidly approaching.
Yes.
We'll recess until Wednesday.
Or just recess and
Just
yeah,
recess.
Indefinitely.
we're recessed. Yeah.
Yes.
I recall it used to be that at some point, maybe earlier than now, we got an estimate of what they were giving to, each division got an estimate of what they have. We haven't gotten that yet.
Well,
90 million overall.
It was eight,
no, we were short 19 revenue.
I think it was 88 million.
I think, well, we're rounding. We always round. Hell, what's a helicopter paying?
But that was just the revenue. We are also adding, we are also increasing the budget, and we'll have to find those funds too, not just the 90 million, but everything we add, something's got to come from somewhere.
Well, a lot of them have gone in the education trust fund.
Yeah, but usually we are given a proportion, we're given an estimate of how much goes to Div 1, Div 2, and
Yeah.
Div 3, and I'm not aware that we've gotten that estimate yet.
Not yet.
So I think we're working through what we can to this point, and I would think hopefully by the end of this week, we'll have a clearer, bigger picture. So some of these decisions of can we afford $200,000 for this, maybe we'll have a
Right.
better idea by the end of the week. I don't want to say hopefully, but hopefully, because that would mean we're making progress, right? So I hopefully we'll be in a good position to have a long day Friday.
Do we have any bills Wednesday?
Across the hall in full committee,
Yeah, it's hearings.
yeah,
Division 2 bills, I'm just saying.
we do. Many,
Those aren't all ours.
no,
I'm asking,
And that's the one, remember that school districts, we go from 5,000 to 20,000. And then,
what I'm going to is I'd like to have somebody speaking to our bills. So,
Yeah. Sure.
I'm happily willing to let somebody else speak to these things.
but you have to tell us if you want us to.
Well,
And then there'll be the bills where we will speak again.
Speak, yeah, whatever, sure.
Really, most of those are recent articles, like the comments.
I think they were all unanimous.
this is just the first committee, the first referred bills that we got. So these are the early ones. I think for us, everything was either retained unanimous, was 129, the hygiene products bill, and 207, which was that just local school budget impact. There was no FN on that bill. So I think our bills are pretty, yeah, they should be, I think, for,
We only have two.
we only have two bills that I think are not retained, but we still have to make a recommendation of retain over there, and the full committee would vote to retain.
Okay.
But I think I'd have to look at the list again, but I think it's only 129 and 207 that are moving along.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be the others.
If it was just an ought to pass. I think this is our only amendment, is just the one we did today.
Because my mind is scrambled on a full committee meeting. We haven't had one where we voted stuff out in a long time, so I'm just. And at some point, I get the pleasure of going over this entire HB two. with the committee.
And so so on, if all goes well, Monday, the 27th, I think it is, or whenever the Monday is around there, is when each division will be presenting the culmination of all the recommendations to the full committee. So all the changes. So we'll have one of those detailed change documents, the legal size,
Right.
with all each accounting unit essentially change that you do in the operating budget. And then we'll have a House Bill 1 and 2 packet. So it'll be similar to this with all of our amendments attached to it that we're amending House Bill 2. And that's when you would walk through the detail change and the index and all the amendments.
So if there's an item on here that is not affecting any, we didn't change anything.
It wouldn't even be included in that document. So it would be included in your final full committee House Bill 2, but you're only going to speak to the changes that we're recommending to 1 and 2.
Okay, that I can handle. All right.
So I guess
So 207, what was 207?
I think 207 was relative to increasing the threshold of when a local school district has to have a public hearing on a dollar amount. Yeah, so I think it,
Right.
correct.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep,
and
yep,
I'd have to look at the list, but I feel like everything else was retained, and then there's the hygiene bill.
Right.
I'd have to double check, but if
Okay.
there was anything else, it was not a significant bill. Everything was unanimous for all
I'm
those
trying
ones.
to steel myself so that I don't wake up 2 o'clock Tuesday morning panicked. So now I'm less panicked.
That's more of a 5 a.m.
you're
thing.
gonna be panicked seeing the snow.
Well, that's all right. But I think that starts at 10 o'clock on Wednesday, as I recall.
Yeah, I think there's a non-germane public hearing at 10, and then a work session on House Bill 49 again, a full committee, and then the full committee exec on all the bills, I think, starts at 11.
Okay.
It's gonna be a long day.
So everybody should take their boards and name tags.
Yeah, the next meeting for us will be in the full room.
So we take our own name tags, right?
Yeah,
Well,
are you?
Down a public hearing.
Yeah, I think they'll have tables set up, or usually they set up like folding tables in
So-
like the front of Reps Hall.
Okay.
And you take your,
So we'll.
name tags.
I gotcha. That's
Yeah,
cool.
Oh, to the 2 o'clock.
yeah, I forgot about you'll be in Reps Hall this afternoon.
Hey, it's 2 o'clock.
You should be able to leave your stuff here.
No, it's
Son
2
of a gun, I
o'clock.
would have missed it.
2 o'clock.
Yes.
It depends.
Yes.
Have you seen your email?
Go to the member, we would go to the different.
Yeah,
Gary
London, Gary,
We went to Milford.
Lakes Region.
We went to Milford one year.
Dairy.
Those are fun.
Matter of fact, he was there complaining.
Oh, don't you point fingers.
RFM.
Lakes Region. FRM. What a hell of a speech.
RFM, whatever it is.
Hell of a speech.
Okay,
Well, that's true.
so we'll recess this session.
End of that.
Thank you.